Oh, for the love.
Sorry, just clearing my Mountain Dew hole.
I got my phone hole cleaned today.
That's where you keep it?
You're so cerebral and you're so developed and evolved.
From the middle after dark over here.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 55 of From the Middle. We are three middle-class guys in the middle of America in the middle chapters of our lives with a point of view that's somewhere in the middle. If you are joining us for the first time and that description wasn't good enough, we're just three guys that also happen to be dads. Happy belated Father's Day, gentlemen. And geeks and music nerds and all of the things. And those are the things we talk about on this episode. We're just going to dive into today's topic because I think it's a fun one. And it is that of manliness. What is manliness? What are the expectations of us as men? Even more specifically, what are those moments where you felt like you had to turn in your man card and or the things you feel like you're expected to know as men? All of the above. I think it's a really good, potentially fun discussion. So we have some stories for each of us, and we'll kind of go around and share some of ours and ask follow-up questions. But you guys haven't talked yet. Say hi.
Hi.
Hey.
Does that sound fun?
Yeah, I'm super excited for this episode. I'm going to take lots of notes because I'm sure I'm not doing. So it's great.
We have a fair amount of female listeners, so not at the exclusion of them, because they might find this topic interesting as well, and probably would have a lot to weigh in on. But yeah, I would feel that it's true for a lot of guys that you have those moments where you feel like, I feel like I'm expected to know that as a guy of a certain age, or I definitely didn't feel manly in that moment.
Right.
And so
whatever that means. I guess people can define terms for themselves. We're not gonna mince words. We all know what we're talking about, the kinds of things. Social construct, yada, 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 all that other stuff. Get that out of the way. You all know what we're trying to say.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah. So
all of those things. So I'll kick it off since I think this was mostly my idea. And I asked Sherry, I told her rather that this was a topic that I thought we would touch on the episode. And so I said, can you think of any off the top of your head? Like just those moments where I turned in my man card, to use the phrase. And she just started rattling a bunch off really quick. And I said, first of all, you're coming up with these pretty quickly, and that's hurtful. Also, it feels like you're playing a different game, and that's, let's talk about things that we would say are true about Kory that you wouldn't often define as or associate with masculinity. So that was fun. Going back, though, if you want to start a little sooner, all the things that I was good at weren't like the things that you would typically ascribe to young boys, right? Like I was good at music and art, not sports, right? So I was already okay with a certain amount of that. But one of the things, and I'll tell my version first or her version first, and then I'll tell her version. As she was rattling off her examples, she goes, because I watch Sports Center a lot more than you do, I'll tell you a sports news update or something that happened. And then you, when you're with your guy friends, will tell that bit of news. And you steal my sports stories. And I said, no. When I relay the story, I say, did you hear? I didn't say I heard. I said, did you hear? Right?
Yeah.
But the minute my guy friends have a follow-on question, I'm out.
I don't, Yeah, I missed that part of the story. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look that one up.
So Sherry's like, you steal all my sports stories. So that's a funny one. Because yeah, she's way more into the news of sports and the things surrounding sports and who got drafted and what high school quarterback we think is going to commit to the Ohio State University and all that. And I'm just like, I enjoy watching Ohio State football, but all the stuff surrounding it and all the talking heads and speculation and, hey, did you hear that we just booked a home and home series with Alabama for 2027 and 2028? And I'm like, cool. So that's my first one.
Uh-huh. That was actually a big deal, by the way, because that's not something that Alabama does.
Right.
That's not something the SEC does, at all. And follow up to the thing about not caring about news. I distinctly remember in elementary and junior high and probably even high school, being at friends' houses and them wanting to just turn on Sports Center and watch. Probably more junior high and high school and not getting it. Not saying I didn't understand sports in general, but why would you want to sit and watch people talk about sports over and over? And I feel like I have to give credit sometimes to things that I'm into or people that I'm around for getting more into them. That's just kind of how it works, right? Our dad was into sports. He didn't probably watch a ton of sports news, but would watch the sports themselves. But me playing NCAA football on PlayStation got me into a lot of the behind the scenes of with all the recruiting mechanics and scheduling and conferences, building conferences, actually got me into more of the behind the scenes of the sport than probably anything else. So even being around my friends and peers and family members didn't do it, but eventually I started to get to the point where I'm more like Sherry, especially with college football, where I can sit and enjoy hearing them talk about it. So it's funny that you brought that one up first.
And that is a funny example because that is the first time in a couple years where I told Sherry something before she heard it, that specific example about the home and home series with Alabama. And she goes, well, look at you giving me a sports story. And I'm like, how turned on are you right now?
That's awesome.
So thanks to my buddy Garrett, who actually shared that with me via Facebook Messenger. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I used it later to my advantage.
Tell Sherry this.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, I steal my wife's sports stories. That's my first one.
So I just want to make a quick blanket. Kendall here, everybody. How are you?
Hey, Kendall.
Hi, Kendall.
This is like a support group, I guess.
Oh, I need to say it sadder then. Okay, try it again.
My name is Kendall, and
hi, Kendall.
Here is my man card. No, just kind of a quick blanket, sort of set the scene for the dynamics of the Ayla household between my wife and I. So when we got married, I had been, renting my entire adult life. And specifically at the time that we got married, I was renting a duplex. And then my wife already had a house. And I remember when we were dating still, and I'm walking around her house and just I remember being impressed at wow, there's so much cool stuff in here. It was an old house that had been renovated and that kind of thing. Slowly I'm starting to pick up on the this is a house that was built early 1800s, and somebody at some point in time put ceiling fans, and she's like, yeah, I did that. and then talking about a bathroom, she's like, yeah, I've replaced everything all in here, and I tiled the floor, and so come to find out she had done all of her own reno work, and as I'm getting to know her, that surprised me just because it didn't fit the standards that were in my brain. But she is very, very handy, and and I consider myself average, maybe above average. I don't consider myself inept at all when it comes to just about anything home improvement. There are things I would rather not do for various reasons, but I mean, I feel like I can hold my own. But then, like when we're getting married and we're going through the process of going through our stuff, because we had the situation where each of us had been living as adults on our own for quite a while, and we were both self-sufficient in doing so. And so like we had everything. So I mean, we didn't need to register for a toaster because we had 2 of them. And so like we had to get rid of all of our stuff. And going through tools, I remember like her reciprocating saw is better than mine. She has a chisel set and I don't. She's got a belt sander. I don't have one of those either.
The fact that she called hers a reciprocating saw and you called yours a backy forthy sawy.
I just imagine you going inside and Amy asking hey, how's it going with all the tools? Go, mine are a lot more worn out. We'll probably just some of yours.
Yeah, I've used mine too much.
Mine are too heavily used.
In my duplex.
Yours are in pretty good shape. I don't know. Maybe I'm just tougher on mine. I don't know. Anyway, we'll keep yours.
So
maybe I'm just tougher on mine. There's blood all over mine.
And then she says, "Are you going to carry all the extra stuff out to the car to get rid of it?" And then there's Kendall, there's like a Arrested Development cut to Kendall sad walking with your head down with one broom out to your car to put it in the trunk because that's the only thing you have to get rid of.
Yeah. So there's that. Like we live in a household where like legitimately like my wife is a handy woman, and she holds her own. Not only that, is better than me at a lot of those things. So, which is cool, which is nice to have. But there are moments where it's like, man, I gotta work on my chops here. And then just kind of one more story. I have some other examples, but before we move on, I just want to say this. So a few weeks ago, we had purchased some cabinets and secondhand from Craigslist or whatever, and we had the seller deliver them to our house. And it's this older guy, retiree, maybe in his 70s, and he had his adult son there to help unload them. And I'm in the backyard, and like I'm like pruning trees in the backyard or something. I don't know why I remember that I had pruning shears in my hand, but I did. And I come walking up front because she tells me that the guy's here, and she's up there, and I see her talking to the guy. and apparently that conversation that she had with him was he had a bag full of hardware and a 2x4, and she went to go, "Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, we can." He's like, "Oh, where's your husband? I want to tell him what these are for." I'm like, dude,
if he only knew.
You said that to the wrong person.
Oh no.
And I mean, we didn't jump on him or anything. There's a generation thing there or whatever, but it was just, we laughed about it afterward because it was like, man, no, she's the one you need to talk to. But no, so yeah, he handed me the stuff in the 2x4, and he was explaining things to me a lot. And while he was explaining it, he said, "I brought this 2x4. I don't expect a house like yours to have scrap wood in the garage." I'm like, what? Like he was under the impression that people who live in suburbs don't do their own work.
This guy makes all kinds of the wrong assumptions.
It was just a funny little run-in.
It's funny because as you're setting up this story and telling us he's older gentleman, whatever, retiree, I'm like, great, our listeners are gonna think we're ageist, and then here we are at the end of the story, and this guy's the ageist. I don't expect young people like you to have spare wood in your house.
You mean like that stack right there?
Yeah, she was using that to build a new addition on the house.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I have a wife that not only rivals me in do-it-yourselfness, but is better. And so the situation in our house is one where like we have a lot of stuff that's hand built, and I mean she's made probably as far as like furniture-ish kinds of things, she's made most of it.
Wow.
So
Oh, Amy.
yeah.
I really wish she had looked back at that guy and said, "You can keep those tools. Mine are nicer."
Yeah.
We've got a nicer set in here. I just thought I'd keep that. So, it's funny you asked Sherry, because as we were discussing the topic, I text Bree. I was working, but I texted her and said, "Hey, here's what we're covering if you have any ideas." And after a really long pause, the response is,
Thanks for that.
it's
Mine
text.
was immediate.
It's text, but you still know it's a long pause based on average duration of response time times time of day. And she said, "I can't think of anything. You're perfect." And I went, "Okay, all right, okay. I don't care for that." Perfect. Yeah. She didn't have any.
It's
I had
that bad, huh?
Yeah, I had a whole list though, so it's fine. She knew that I had probably written down a small paragraph of different bullet points and things. Kory, you have one on here, but it was honestly the first one that came to mind, so you can just build off of it. Literally every time I've ever taken my car to a mechanic is probably going to be in that list. I know nothing. And I feel like a child when I go in there and try to tell them anything. I try to use as few words as possible, so it's less likely they think I'm an idiot. And that's about as unscathed as I can get from that experience. Like, yeah, I think oil needs change. Something headlight. I don't know. It might be going in and out. I'll let you guys take a look. I didn't want to mess with it. I'm just gonna wait here in the lobby. Can I have some coffee? And that's usually my whole experience. And just know that they're gonna come back and be like, "Did you know 3 of your wheels were wobbling when we pulled it around? And gas is leaking there's liquids everywhere. Did you know that?" And be like, "I didn't, I might have remembered something. I'm glad you pulled it up. I was thinking about it. I forgot to mention it when I walked in. Obviously that was wrong." Those things you just said.
Yeah, I've got the parts at my house. I was going to do it later, but since we have it here.
Look, quarantine, we're supporting local. You're a business. I figured I'd just let you guys do it. It's my bit of charity. So go ahead. That's mine.
That's a good point, because part of it, in these moments where you feel that way, part of it is certainly the audience or the setting that you're bringing the problem or challenge to, right? So all these guys have grease all over their huge forearms, and you're just like, and Brian Regan has a joke about car repair that's highly relatable to me. He's like, I walk into the garage and they're like, "Yeah, what seems to be the problem?" And I just have to make the noise of what my car's doing, like, "Can you fix that?" And I've literally made the noise of what my car is making to a mechanic, because I have no other way to articulate or guess.
That's, you know what? That's a good thing. That's so. I spent the better part of a decade service writing and service managing for automotive repair facilities, and I will tell you that using the onomatopoeia words is often useless. Like one person's screech is another person's squeak, is another person's whatever. Like those descriptive words, like they don't help a ton. Literally making the noise yourself is so much more helpful.
I was on to something.
It really is. We would even have people who would be like say we couldn't get something to occur in the shop that they were telling us about, and then they would go back and driving, and then like the next day it would start making the noise, and be like, "Hold your phone up to the noise so I can hear it." Like that kind of thing is helpful too. Noises can be really tricky to figure out sometimes. But I will also say this, that the service writers, like they know and understand and don't expect their clientele to be mechanics. and it's almost like by avoiding trying to talk about it, you're making things worse, and it.
That's such a good point, though, because the same is true when you enter any hobby for the first time. If you take on a posture of like, hey, I know nothing, I'm teachable, help me out. Most guys, and this is almost always the case, most guys don't make you feel dumb or belittle you. They'll like happily walk you because they're getting to show off the things that they know. This was true for me when I started bow hunting, because I had only ever gone with guns, and we know where that gets me. But when you start
Flying in the middle of a field, that's where it gets you.
Yeah. But when you start, you're like, I know nothing about this. I know nothing about the equipment that I need. I know nothing about anything around this new endeavor. Most guys are willing to help you. In your mind, though, your fear is that you're going to ask them a question and they're just going to laugh at you. And so it's clearly an in your head thing, but I'm comforted that I was on the right track with something regarding car repair, and just go ahead and make the noise. I'm good at impressions.
Well, it's worse is the longer you wait, the worse and worse it gets, because with those things, because now it's like you've had these like 2 or 3 questions that you never had the nerve to ask. And if you would have just asked them when they came up, nobody would have thought anything of it. But now it's been like 5 years, and you should really know the answers to these questions by now. And now you do look like a fool if you ask them.
Yeah.
And it just gets worse.
Since you, Kendall, brought up, DIY and home ownership and stuff, that was one that was like my first year of being a homeowner. I was like, there's a lot of stuff I don't have. Tools and yard equipment and all of that. And you bring up such a great point when you talk about like, it's not like you're willing to learn or not learn. So quick anecdote that I think will help like round out this idea a little more. So part of it is generational, like an expectation, but this thing in your head that keeps the thing that you replay in your head as your bar or metric for what manliness is, or what guys should do or shouldn't do. My buddy Greg, who's been on our podcast before, shared a book with me once called Backing Up a Trailer in 101 Things That Every Man Should Know, right? Like, what are those things that you feel like you should know, or that your society expects you to know? So the story is that Dylan and I's grandfather, it's kind of sad, but his dad had left the family when he was young. And so one of their bathrooms remained unfinished, didn't have a floor, didn't have the toilet set or the sinks put in or anything. But I think, if I remember correctly, they had some of the parts. So my grandpa, who I asked my mom today, she said she thinks he was between 12 or 13 when he went to the library, got every book he could on bathroom maintenance and construction and installation. And at age 13, because there was no man in the house, his brother was off at war, he finished the family bathroom and set the sinks and like did everything with the tub, and at 13 years old.
Wow.
And so you hear those stories and you're like, okay, first time homeowner. And that's what's in your head. I was like, well, my grandfather could do a bathroom when he was 13, and just tiling a floor for the first time, or like doing a backsplash. If you've never done it and you've never been taught, you don't know, right? And then I almost feel guilty when you approach any project and you sort of do that cost and value or stress and time, sort of whatever the variables are in your head that you need to make the decision, and you just decide that it doesn't make sense for me to do this because the time input, I would be better off like doing a freelance project in my office than I would be to try to learn this thing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You almost feel guilty when you make that value assessment and go, it just isn't worth it for me. Like, unless you want the excuse to buy a new tool, or you have tons of time on your hand during a quarantine and you're like, I'd like to learn masonry or something, right? So it's almost like you have to imagine a flow chart, right? Where it's like, what is motivating this project? If an emergency, that's one thing. If it's like you're bored and you'd like to learn a new skill, that's a completely different thing. Second part of the flow chart, do you have the proper tool for it? If you don't, that's a very different path than if you have all the proper tools, right? So the very first project that we've ever hired out since Sherry and I have been married just happened recently. We have a half-acre backyard, and we had a 20-plus-year-old picket fence that was rotten and all the posts were snapping off. I had been maintaining and replacing each post as it snapped off one by one, but because there was a 2 or 3 foot concrete footer, I had to dig up a 2-foot concrete footer. And then when you dig up a 2-foot concrete footer, because the bowl is so big, you don't have a really nice post hole anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So when I would put the new post in, I would just pour Quickcrete in there and just pray, because now you've got a big ball. And I'm like, oh man, if they have to dig those up, they're going to be digging up these big concrete masses, right? Anyway, long story short, we hired it out.
Mm-hmm.
It costs a substantial amount of money, but that's the best decision I've ever made. These guys knocked it out in 2 days. They brought out a mini bobcat with an auger. It was like watching magic happen. Thinking with my metric of doing one post at a time, I would still be on post number 7. So there are things like that where you just like, it isn't worth, for me, my time isn't, you know what I'm saying? But you always feel guilty when you make a choice.
Yeah. I was thinking about White Castle cheeseburgers. Do I need to explain?
Yes.
So the way that, if anybody has ever like looked into how to DIY a White Castle cheeseburger at home, basically what you have to do is you get your ground meat, and then it's not ground enough when it comes from the store, so you have to put it in the food processor and make it into like a paste. And then you have to roll that out, and then you have to get like a straw or something to make little holes. And then you have to like pre-cut triangles, and you need to put that in the freezer because they cook them from frozen. And then when you pull it out of the freezer, then you have to like chop up like 14 onions, because that's how much onion they go through, and put a bed of onions down, get your frozen beef and crack the things apart, put them on the onions, and then do all the rest of that stuff. And it's surprisingly, for a cheap knockoff of a cheap cheeseburger, takes a lot of work to do. Or you could spend 75 cents and go to White Castle and have them do it, because they do it all the time, and they can do it so much more efficiently than you can, and it'll probably taste better.
Yeah. So you're almost, that's such a great point. And I was talking to my dad this past weekend. We visited them for Father's Day, and we were talking about this idea. And right, like a lot of the people in our generation in rural Ohio, at a different socioeconomic level, like they didn't have a choice. It was like you fix it or you don't have that thing. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like they could have hired it out, right? So that is one difference. And then the other is like, I've been reading, I just finished while I was on vacation, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And he talks about this idea of gumption. And you need a certain amount of gumption, energy, and enthusiasm around a project to be able to attack it properly. And he talks about gumption traps, external or internal things that stop you from that momentum of doing the project soundly and efficiently and in the right things. And one of the first is like you not having the proper tools. Mm-hmm. So if you take the fence for an example, right? Like without a mini bobcat and an auger, or an 18-year-old body and a post hole digger, that's going to take a really long time and be a high amount of stress and sweat equity. Or I could be in my office designing a logo that's going to pay to have that hired out, and I'll still have some money left over. You know what I mean? So it's like, you can't compare yourself to a different generation and a different time and a different availability to certain things. Right now, somehow, there are no swimming pools in the United States right now because all of the public pools are closed. So everybody's buying backyard pools, and somehow ours is on its way from the warehouse or the retailer, right? It's a 21-foot diameter steel pool. And they're like, the hardest part of this is going to be leveling the ground because we're not paying to have it installed. So I'm like, how do you level ground for a pool? Which you could make a really big deal, or you can minimize it and make it as simple as make sure the ground is level.
Yeah.
But until you talk to a guy who installs pools for a living, which I did, and he's talking about something called a sod cutter, and you need like 7 tons of sand brought in, and these are things I don't know, but I'm going to tackle it later this week, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Do you have to do a ground fault or anything for power out to it?
A what?
This is not perfect example. This is not something that I knew, but somebody said, hey, based on coding in different townships, sometimes you have fence requirements and door handles to the fence in the yard and certain spacing and with power lines. And then your pool needs power and you have to run like a ground fault out to it because you can't have like a wire running across your yard and all kinds of stuff that I didn't know. Like this is a perfect example of, as I was talking to somebody who had done that, like I wouldn't have even thought about, is your fence right for zoning for the yard to put the pool in, let alone the requirements for the pool. And so I knew you had mentioned the pool, and so I'm like, yeah, my brother's getting a pool. I don't know. Is he doing da 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 da? I'm like, yeah, I don't know any of that. That's a great point.
Well, yeah. So I don't know. I'm probably just gonna trench the power out to the pump, but I know I'm far away enough from all the power and gas, and I know that's not what you're talking about, but yeah, I know I'm good there. And we have a completely fenced in backyard, so I'm going to err on the side of, yes, it probably has to be a certain height with a certain type of latch, but
yeah, totally out of my ballpark. Hey, can I plug a YouTube channel that's related to our topic?
Yeah.
Have you guys heard of the YouTube channel Dad, How Do I?
Yes, actually.
Okay. So it was started by a guy named Rob Kenny, who is basically internet dad now. And his dad left when he was a teenager. And so his whole YouTube channel was like, he realized as he got older, all these things he didn't know how to do. So now he makes videos and records for the world's worth of people who didn't have dads or dads that taught them certain things if they want to be able to learn. And so if anybody just enjoys that kind of stuff, or their dad's busy or not around or whatever, check out Dad, How Do I? That would be a fun little plug for his channel. And it seems like he's doing a really great thing. So
that's awesome.
A few extra subscribes for him would be well worth it if we directed a few people his way.
That's really cool. So yeah, those are the things. And then as we were having this discussion, I think either Sherry or our stepmom said something like, well, who is the voice? Like, who is the they making you feel like you should know? Is that an internal thing, or do you really feel like it's external, like an external voice of society or whatever that's pressuring or putting this expectation on you that you have to have X amount of things understood? Even the fact that we're talking about this would probably put us into the not manly category because we're sharing our feelings and the ways that we feel like we are less than or struggle sometimes.
But I don't know anybody who actually thinks that way about other people, though. A lot of people think that way about themselves, and they sort of project it onto society. But I'm not convinced that society actually would actually think that about us.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think it's a thing. I think that it used to be a thing, and I think that we're afraid of it being a thing internally, and so we project it on society. But outside of that, my general experience is it's not a big deal.
Kendall, that's a really good challenge to our topic for this episode. I would love to hear you say more about that. That maybe we internally as individuals are making it a bigger deal than it actually is societally. Because I imagine there are parts of the world where you would feel more exposed than others, not knowing some of these things or being educated in some of these things. So if you're from a town of mostly blue collar folks and farmers and whatever, and you're in show choir, that might stick out a little more than other parts of the world or U.S. So I'm interested in hearing you say more about that, like why you think it's.
Well, it's just I think that like I think that's something where most people, and this is all based on experience, right? So this is admittedly based on the people around me. So I'm not going to say everywhere for everyone, but in my life, most of the guys that I know, if I were to talk to them, if I were to send them this podcast and be like, do you think we're a bunch of pansies? I don't think any of them would honestly think that we are. So that's basically what it's based off of.
Yeah.
But for some reason, like even though that's true for me, that I don't actually believe that any of my guy friends, or mentors or anything else would think that I'm less of a man because I haven't mentioned it yet, but like electrical is one of the things that I just am not comfortable touching. Would think that I'm an irresponsible husband because I'd want to hire electrical work out, or because my wife's reciprocating saw is better than mine, or any of that stuff. I don't know of any guy who would actually count that as a ding against me, but for some reason I'm still worried about it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like that's so what that tells me is that what I'm doing is I'm projecting onto the society around me something that's not actually there.
Gotcha.
So it probably exists on a spectrum, and like you said, depending on where you grow up, it might land differently on that spectrum. But for me and for my surrounding, I feel like I often am worried about nothing.
Yeah, I mean that's my life. So yeah,
yeah,
overthinking and overanalyzing and all of that. That's well established on this podcast that is.
Well, and Kendall, to that point, I think somebody that's actually an expert on all of this would say, and you weren't born projecting that out to the world either. So there's enough things around you that told you what you were supposed to be like, whether they did or didn't. Maybe it was a movie or a show or an ad or a TV personality, Tim the Toolman Taylor, but he was good at all these things, but he was also kind of the doofus, and would have accidents all the time. But there's all those kind of things around you that you saw that created that. And then you push that back out, now because of what you saw and we all saw growing up in whatever form we saw it in. Some people to stronger degrees or lesser degrees. But yeah, it's a lot of where you grow up too. Like, one of the things that, I don't bond with other guys over fishing, hunting, and camping. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy doing any of those things from a social aspect, but they're not hobbies of mine. But because of where I grew up, that might be perceived as a little odd. If I grew up in the middle of Chicago, would anyone care that I wasn't into fishing and hunting and camping? Probably not. They would think nothing of it because that's not anybody's normal hobby in New York City or Chicago or LA or Miami. But because of where I grew up, that might seem odd that those aren't things that I'm super into. One thing that might be more universal that I could use, because people golf everywhere, I'm also not really into golfing. And that's pretty male dominated sport, presumably. I don't know. There might be just as many women golfers in the world as men.
Yeah, there's not.
I think that's a safe. I'm not saying there shouldn't be. I'm just saying statistically, I think
stop worrying about people getting mad at you for saying something that's true. There are more guys who golf than women.
Yeah. So, anyways,
it's okay for that to be true.
But that's something that anybody anywhere can be into, whether you grew up in an urban setting or you grew up in a really rural setting. And everyone everywhere can golf. I'm also not into golf. But I like you said, I don't actually know anyone who cares that I'm not really into any of those things. Yeah. And they're just going to be like, cool, what else are you into? And I can rattle off something else that they might relate to more, like college football or video games or whatever.
Mm.
If anybody's listened to this podcast at all, you know I'm always interested in picking at it and going, but why is that? But why is that? But why is that? Like the golf one is an interesting one to me, because part of the reason that that's probably perpetuated is because they always say like more business is done on the golf course than is done in the boardroom, right? Like guys that make business decisions or partnerships or agreements or feel each other out on the golf course as far as, is this somebody I want to be in business with? So like I remember a time when, even when we were in network marketing for a while, where it was like, well, I better learn golf because when we go on all these business trips, all the guys go golfing and I'm not really, I've done like a couple scrambles where you play best ball and that's it. And I'm a hack, like I'm not good at it. But I should learn it and I should get some clubs because they're going to go out and that's how they'll socialize. And I don't do that, but I better learn or else I'll miss out. So I wonder if that's part of what's like kept that golf one going. Because for a while I tried and then I was just like, I did the cost value or, you know, stress value assessment and went, it costs too much time and money to be good at this. And that swing off the tee is just an anomaly to me. I can't figure it out. I've got too much of a baseball swing and it's just not good. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I feel like you could pick any number of, because most normal people aren't into every single sport. So it's easy for me to rattle off like, yeah, I'm not really into golf or like into any kind of racing that's not a video game. I'll play Mario Kart till the end of time. But like, I'm not into NASCAR. I'm not into Indy or Formula, whatever. It's not a thing. But like I think you're right. Like at least the golf one, it feels more gentlemanly and probably does have country club ties, which is social networking and before social networks. And there's probably a whole lot more ingrained into that culture than something like NASCAR or hockey or whatever. But it is interesting that, you know, you can highlight a couple, at least for me, like golfing and racing are not things I'm into at all. You know, so I don't know. It's an interesting point you make about linking golf with business because and networking really, because that is different than probably most other sports.
Mm-hmm.
So this is another thing I've observed lately, like in a lot of marketing targeted toward guys, a lot of it goes back to like the old timey, gentlemanly sort of fisticuffs and curled mustaches. Like a lot of the marketing goes back to that era when guys were guys. And like, think of the Old Spice commercial with like bears and sharks and, you know, like it's tongue in cheek. But they're still doing it for a reason. Like something in us still likes that stuff.
Yeah.
Like the fact that hipster barbershops are a thing, to me, says that something, we still like that idea of like the old timey guy. And the smells and the balms and the lotions and the salves.
If you don't go to a good barber now, unless he has leather chairs, a fireplace, and bourbon.
Yeah, like
that's a thing again.
Like, so there's a reason that even like the Art of Manliness is a great site. I just shared it with you guys, and you're probably already familiar. They have a podcast, and they put out some really good articles from time to time. And I think it's like making fun of itself, but you still want to read it. Like, one of the articles was like how to give a great elbow jab or something like that. And you're like,
yeah,
I should really read that. Like how to tie a fishing fly. And you're like, I'm probably never going to fly fish, but I feel like I need to read that. So I'm interested in you guys' thoughts on why that is. Like, why does that sort of old timey, gentlemanly, I think of that boxer, that black and white photo of the boxer.
Yeah.
All like breweries and men's skincare products. And I got some great stuff, by the way. Shout to Artius Man who dropped off some ARTIUSMAN. I placed an order, but he just hand delivered it, and because they're in my area, and refunded the shipping and then threw in a bunch of extra products. So thanks. Is it Jeff? Thanks, Jeff, for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so like all that stuff like sort of harkens back to that time, and I'm wondering like why that seems to be the case right now, why that's so popular.
I don't have an answer yet, but I did, as you're talking about it, I did think of Friends as Monica's choosing between Chandler and Richard as being like the case in point of this whole discussion. And Chandler's like not manly at all. And Richard has like, they even joke about his apartment and his cigars and like everything that he's into is just like what you assume is like the pinnacle of manliness.
And you're clearly Chandler because you just made that reference.
Right. Yeah, I've never denied it for sure.
I wonder if there is a portion of this. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how to say this thought. This is a theory of something that I think might be happening, for good, bad, or ugly. Is because so much of this other stuff that like it admittedly maybe once was a big marker of manhood, but today no longer really is, and most of it for good reason. That if that leaves a void, so now like, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I could tell you too from working in the mechanic shops that like of the mechanics, the guys who are wrenching on cars, like you have the older guys who a lot of them like they would go home and they would fix all their own stuff and they would never hire anything out. But then you'd also have plenty of guys who would say and admit like, look, cars are my thing, drywall's not my thing. I'll pay somebody to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Who'll use that type of verbiage. So I don't know. I feel like there's all that stuff that is no longer a marker of your manhood, and you could end up with this situation where maybe men are left trying to find something that's theirs, and I don't know. And without all the rest of that, maybe like harkening back to not necessarily old days when men were men, but it's interesting that a lot of it is focused in on grooming, and saying, hey, look, there's all these products, we want men's products, and there's a beard trend, like we want to grow beards because that's something men can do. And so I don't want to cross a line and make it sound like the women have taken over, because that's not what I think is going on at all. But I do think that there's, I don't know. Am I making any sense?
You are completely. I also feel you dancing around it because it is a tricky thing, and I think if anybody's really listening to what we're saying, they'll know what you're saying and what you're not saying. So
yeah, yeah. Like I'm not saying that. Like I'm not saying let's bring back the patriarchy. Like that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's like there's a reason we still want to retreat and call them our man caves and she sheds. Like, just want a distinct space that feels like a space not only for your stuff, but stuff that your immediate peers would enjoy, in a place you can be. And I don't know if that's hitting on any of it either, but that's what popped into my head.
Yeah. So it's like golf, for example. Golf is something that's probably on its way out the door. It seems that way.
Millennials.
And they're taking American cheese away from us, and they're taking golf. Both things that I enjoy. Yeah. But so like golf courses are starting to see it, starting to struggle. They're going to start closing down, and when that happens, like, there's a sense of manliness that men could have by going and golfing with their buddies. That was something different. An experience that they get. Like, does that experience need to be replaced with something in a healthy manner? Even I'm not saying that it is that. I don't know, but does that experience have to be replaced with something? And if so, could it be replaced with something like skin cream. Like, is that you know, if you put an old timey guy on the bottle and make it seem more manly, they'll be like, yeah.
The fisticuffs guy on the bottom, because then we know.
Yeah.
This is marketed to me.
I think it's safe to say, because Kendall, I hear what you're saying. And I hear in that societally, there's a lot going on that does two things. It either makes guys feel guilty that some things are more guyish. Just by saying that, somebody's offended.
Yeah.
Or the things that are guyish, we emasculate somewhat. And so guys are left longing for things that are their space, that is their space.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be foolish to not acknowledge that there's a lot going on. This is not any commentary on who should be and equal and all of that. Yes. But women still want to do womanly things and guys still want to do guy things sometimes. And we're still wired naturally to want to do some of those things sometimes.
Exactly.
And to pretend like that's not true is whatever, silly. So
yeah. And it's okay to reach one direction or the other when it comes to, like, it's fine.
And I can want to take a Zumba class, dang it.
Yes, a guy can want to take a Zumba class, and that's perfectly fine.
I really want to take a Zumba class, and I know I'm going to be one of the only guys in there because I like dance. I was a show captain.
I can rattle off a long list of romantic comedies that I like, and it's fine. I like laughing along to the romance.
I was a show choir dance captain, and I want to take a Zumba class because I have to trick myself into working out.
As long as you have a beard, that's fine with me, man.
Right? Maybe that's why I have it. So many questions. All right. Loses his hair, grows a long beard. Also, Sherry's girlfriends come over and ask me for interior design advice. Hey, what should I do for my living room? If I get a lamp at this height, what height should this thing over here be? And what color would tie all that in? And should I get a rug? They ask me. Should I feel bad about that?
I'd say no. No, I'm kidding.
With confidence this time.
Oh boy,
it's funny. It's a good conversation and one that you could go into a bunch of different areas on. But like even our dad, you know, like he runs into a home DIY challenge and he just tackles it with fervor. And sometimes he uses it as an excuse to buy a tool that he doesn't currently have, and he's excited about it and he just digs right in. And there are a lot of those things that even if Sherry were listening, she'd be like, no, you're forgetting about this and this. And you did get through it. Like you may have fumbled your way through it, but you learned the skill. Like I know how to do a backsplash now. I know how to do a tile floor now. I didn't know before I started, and now I do. You just sort of mistake your way through it and fail forward. And now you know the thing. And there's a ton of YouTube videos, for all of the things that you're even less inclined or not excited about trying that will walk you through how to do it. So, you know, but should that make you feel bad or guilty or less than because it's not a natural tendency or it's something you didn't already know? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think we were talking about when this idea had come up, I mentioned a little bit, if this is a good segue, I had mentioned a little bit of my background with like electronics and consumer electronics and stuff like that. And you know, one realization that I had, because I think there was a lot of that even for me growing up, you know, teenager, 20 something, that there was a lot of hard skills I felt like I didn't have. A lot of my jobs were in soft skills, sales, customer service. I wasn't making a thing, a product. I was using my personality as part of my jobs. And sometimes when you don't have a hard skill and you have a soft skill, you can feel lesser than. But, you know, I really quickly realized, especially when you're dealing with electronics, that those really tough super knowledgeable mechanics and construction guys, and they could literally build you a massive skyscraper. They come in and they want to know something about, home theater, and you might as well, you start to talk and you might as well be speaking another language, and they're gone. And I think you pretty quickly realize that, while it's great to have hard skills and be able to physically make things, Kory, you talked a little bit about it already. Your time can also be more valuable doing other things, where that's their level of expertise, and you can hire somebody who's built that expertise. Sometimes your time can be better spent doing other things, simply because you just didn't have that skill already. I do think it's important to learn, but I also think it's important to realize that nobody's awesome at everything, even though we have the jack of all trade moniker we like to apply to some people. You quickly realize that you just have different sets of skills and knowledge on different things. And so it's easy to just chalk it up as ignorance and not stupidity, or that you're inept. If you're an IT professional, the amount of things that to help a home or a business are invaluable to some people. And you might be terrible at building that same home that you're trying to secure and apply a network to and things like that. So it's just one of those realizations that you have, that you can just have wildly different skill sets than other people. And that's not lesser than, that's just different, depending on the skill sets.
Another thing that's true is, like, again, overthinking. I often make the DIY project bigger in my head than it ends up being. Or rather, like, what would be the consequence if I try to frame my own basement? What's the big consequence if I do something wrong? I cut a board too short and I get a new 2x4. Like, nothing's going to blow up. No one's going to die, hopefully. Like, the worst thing that could happen in the process of learning isn't really that big of a deal. So just dive into it. Now, that's a spectrum. I know people that just bust a wall out to start a project, and that's totally, you got to put some thought into it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, the worst thing that could happen if I go to try to level my ground improperly is that I dig a little deeper than I need to, and then, you know what I'm saying? Big whoop.
Well, it's funny because I'm decent cook. I prepare most of the meals, and the same thing to anybody who's afraid, like, I just would mess it up. I'm like, so you buy expensive groceries, you burn them and throw them away. At worst, you're out a few bucks and you heat up a box of mac and cheese. It's fine. Like, just, you have to start somewhere. Don't go buy the hardest ingredients to make first, but like, start with some pastas and then play with some seasonings and then cook a steak if you've never cooked one before. But like, you have to start somewhere, and assuming it's not something like a major electrical thing in a house that could be very different than what you described, what am I going to do? Cut some boards and put them around the room and see how things lay out and measure, take into account the difficulty of the work, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. I'll say too, something else that I think has flipped from one generation to the next for me personally is I've heard it said before from guys that the reason why they like to do their own work is because then they know it was done right. For me, I flipped that entirely around for a lot of things. That the reason I don't want to do it isn't because, like, I can make more money by not doing it. It's literally, I don't trust my work nearly as much as I would trust someone else's. And so there's a peace of mind there that comes from me. For example, like plumbing and electrical, two things that I just, generally speaking, don't touch. I'll do basic stuff, replacing a fixture, installing a ceiling fan where there at least was a light fixture before. That sort of thing I'll do with electrical. But I mean, I'm not touching the panel at all. I'm never going to touch the panel. That's always going to be an electrician. If there's something electrical that goes wrong with the furnace, that is always going to be an HVAC guy who comes and fixes that. Never me. And like plumbing, like if there's plumbing behind the walls, like I'm not going to trust myself with anything behind the walls. There's stuff that I happen to know is easier than one might think. And so, like, I've replaced our garbage disposal. I've replaced a toilet in our house. But like, those are things that, like, if you do a little bit of reading, you figure out that those things are easy. I'm not saying that other stuff is hard. It's just that, I don't know. Generally speaking, to be honest, like, I replaced the toilet just because. I don't like that. To be honest, I would have rather have paid somebody to replace it, and I would have still felt more comfortable than doing it myself. But yeah, so there's that. So I don't have that. I don't have that thing in me that says if I do it, I know it was done right. I don't have that in me. As a matter of fact, I have the exact opposite. So like we're going to be redoing our basement, which was already finished, but flood and stuff happened, and we want to kind of tune things a little bit more to what we would want instead of previous owners, and that's not going to be something I'm going to do. As far as like the whole big complete project, there's like all kinds of little stuff in there that I wouldn't want to do. I would much rather have a professional come in and handle for me. And so like I'm going to hire that stuff out for sure. There might be some minor things that we don't have him do because I'm okay with it, but yeah.
I'm with Kendall. There are things that because now I've set the bar really low for our listeners. Like now they think I'm capable of nothing. So now I'm going to wow you with the things that I actually have done. But I completely installed a sink. Like the sink is built into the box piece of furniture cabinet in our guest bathroom, and I put that in myself. But to Kendall's point, I had a plumber come out and literally say if I did it right or not.
Yeah.
I knew water was coming out, and I knew that the hot was the hot and the cold was the cold. But like I wanted to make sure that my connections were secure and that I had done the plumbing aspect of it right, so that I didn't have a problem later, right? So I've put in sinks and I've put in floors, and I've done things like that. But like to Kendall's point, I don't trust myself. I want somebody to come out and go, "Yep, looks like you did a good job. Peace be with you," and then I'm good to go. But in the basement's one that I'm actually interested in doing because Dylan and I's childhood home, the basement was not finished my whole life living there until right before I went to college. And then it became this really awesome entertainment, mini fridge, microwave, like cool area. But I was already gone. And I'm like, man,
see you kids.
We could have had some really fun stuff going on. So I've always wanted our basement finished out. And so I'm going to do the framing, and my dad's going to help me do the electric, and I'll even hang the drywall. But again, stress versus value versus cost versus time. I'm not finishing the drywall. I'm going to have that hired out and have somebody else do the mudding and sanding, because I've done some of that, and that's a nightmare. So, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not unwilling to learn, but sometimes I make it a bigger deal in my head than it ends up being. And when I look back, I did actually enjoy that, and I did actually learn a few new things, and I got a few new tools in the garage to show for it. So, yeah, this has been a fun conversation. I think you could do almost a whole deep dive on any one of the aspects of things that we've hit on here, but
something that I think we just did for maybe a first time today is we took what I think was intended to be a happy and lighthearted episode and turned that on its head and made it into this whole big discussion over over social issues. So that's a first for us.
Hey, fun.
Instead of taking something serious and turning it stupid.
And then we circled back to a positive outlook and some optimism moving forward. So
yeah, and only alienated some people on the way.
Yeah, see. So I'll let you know how a sod cutter works, and how a laser level and sod cutter combination works, and just how far down I end up digging for this above ground pool, and
ground fault.
Yeah, and ground fault.
And how do you get power out to the pool? Yeah.
How do you get power? How many tons of sand do I need delivered to my house?
Thanks.
I see sweat in my future.
Yeah. Oh,
It may be
man.
one of those things where I go, should have paid to have that installed.
Could be. Well,
I'm looking
Godspeed.
forward to hearing about it
Yeah. if you need,
from
if you,
afar.
if you need any help whatsoever, I hear you live in a good neighborhood.
There's probably a lot of people that
And-
would.
Something social distance.
Funnily enough, so we have a swing set and fort combination in the backyard that needs to move first. And so I'm going to need like 5 or 6 guys to help me tip over this big wooden eagle's nest and move it to a different part of the yard. So.
Oh, have you ever seen videos of Amish barn movings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The big steel buildings, they just pick them up.
They just pick them up. They pick them up and walk them.
Insane. Not the barn raisings, folks. We're talking about a steel building is already built and they pick it up and move it.
Yeah, you got like hundreds of Amish guys on the inside of that thing, picking it up and walking it down the road.
Crazy.
It's
Anyway,
insane to watch. Do yourself a favor, figure that out, and then let's all go help Kory move a swing set.
yeah, we should only need 6 of us, 5 or 6 of us, maybe. If you guys aren't doing anything later.
Depends on the length of their beard.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this conversation on manliness in the modern context. And if you have thoughts on any of the things that we've touched on, please let us know. You can find us on social media everywhere at From the Mid Pod. We have a Facebook page, a Facebook group as well. And send in a voice message. We love interacting with you guys in that way. There will be links on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and on Apple Podcasts on how to do that. And this has been a fun conversation, so we appreciate it. And we would love to hear you guys weigh in on your thoughts because it's better when we're all having a conversation together and you don't just hear the 3 of us all the time. So anything else from you guys?
No,
If
sir.
you have anything in here offensive, too, you can let us know via email at feedback@joeroganexperience.com. And just get it all out there. Just send an email, and we can read those, and we'll have learned our lesson after we read them. So feel free to send that in.
And thanks for the man stuff, Artius man. Appreciate you. That was awesome. All right, everybody. This has been From the Middle. I'm Kory. That's Kendall. That's Dylan. And you guys have a good and safe and fun and manly or womanly time.